Alright, guys. Welcome to the new unit analysis and, of course, comparisons for our brand new seasonal units of January 2019. This includes 3 Hoshidans and 2 Anorians. We are going to be examining the units themselves and how they impact the meta. Of course, that's what the video is always about. So whether you play Arena or you play AR or you use them in Abyssals or whatever content you choose to use them, I'm going to really touch on mostly the optimal way to use these units. So that's, of course, coming from a tier 21 top 50 AR perspective. Anything I recommend in builds, we'll try to focus on budget. Not always, but mostly focus on budget builds. That comes from anything from Grails to just 3 or 4 star fodder. So don't worry about anything crazy like that. And of course, I will compare units if applicable. So actually, there's a lot of units here I can't really compare to, but nonetheless, I'll give you some suggestions on how you want to use these sort of units. Of course, if you're watching from Twitch, feel free to give a comment to the guys on YouTube. They should see those messages below. And you guys on YouTube, feel free to give your kind words as well in the comments if you want to be kind. If you have any more specific questions, feel free to join the Discord as well, which is, of course, in the description below. So with that being said, let's take a quick look, starting with Sakura. So Sakura over here is... as I expected in terms of stat spread, she's pretty much a better Mia, Halloween Mia. And the reason I expected this is because Halloween Mia's stat spread was pretty much released to be a disappointment so that something like Sakura could be released to essentially stat creep Halloween Mia. Now, if you already have Halloween Mia, I don't actually recommend pulling for Sakura at all. You really shouldn't because, well, you already have a flying healer. So the only reason you would pull for Sakura would be possibly fodder, but beyond that, you know, I don't really recommend it. So yeah, Sakura is pretty much a better Mia, more attack, more speed. I believe Mia has more res and Sakura has more defense. That's pretty much not really relevant considering a support unit in general. That's what healers tend to be. You can use them uniquely, and I will touch on that, but that's pretty much what it is. Look forward to the end of the video where I'm going to go over actual, like, pull rates, mathematics, and of course I'm going to summarize whether you should be pulling on this banner or not. So that's going to be covered at the end. Anyways, let's jump into our first build, and of course how I anticipate you should use Sakura if you do get her. So yeah, a thing that's unique about Sakura is she makes a pretty good support unit, and that really comes through the fact that she has a lot of cool things going for her. So Grand Scratcher can, especially in combination with speed opening, can pretty much allow you to set up your own units in a way that makes them more consistent. And this is really the case with Gale Force units. I highly recommend, if you're going to use Sakura, that you use her in a way that combines her with Gale Force units. If you combine her with Gale Force units, you are in a good spot because you can bring Gale Force from an awkward 5 charge to a 4 charge and combine with Heavy Blade or Flashing Blade. That's really good. Now, the reason she'll attack is there is because a lot of, like, flyers, for instance, or cavalry need to use Heavy Blade. So if it comes down to a stat check, you pretty much get more consistent Gale Forces that way. But it's not a necessity. You could honestly use anything else in the B slot. It's not really relevant. What's really important here is a synergy between Speed Opening and Grand Scratcher. Hone Attack Seal just gives you kind of like a more consistent attack buff rather than relying on Fire Flood Bomb. And Fire Flood Bomb doesn't really need to be there as well. You could use Heavenly Light or Imbue or whatever you want. It's not super important. Physic as well is not really that important. It's more or less about the consistency of providing other units with good consistent specials, and I think that's where she really shines. You don't even need to use Sakura for this. You could honestly use any healer and they can kind of do the same thing, but at least she comes with the kit available to do it. So yeah, next up is a more like invested build in Sakura. So if you have like your free Takumi lying around, I do think that Absorb Close Counter does make her one of the better users of it, especially when combined with maybe flyer buffs. Auto Attack Wave isn't necessarily easier to obtain, but it doesn't need to be there. You could use Savage Blow instead, for instance. And yeah, you're pretty much using this kind of build because she already has a pretty high attack stat. It's 35 base, so that's really good. It's pretty much like a flying Jenny, but you also have the capability to use stuff like Hone Flyers, Goad Flyers, Ward Flyers, for instance, and all that stuff really makes it so Sakura can really get a lot of value out of an Absorb build like this. Plus, she has decent enough speed that, unlike Jenny, could actually avoid doubles, for instance, if she doesn't kill in Absorb, like a one-hit Absorb. So I think that's a really cool way that you could consider using Sakura with more investment. Unlike Mia, who again didn't have as much attack, so that's kind of the big difference there. And the next one should be Hinoka. We're going to take a quick look at Hinoka now. So with Hinoka, one second. Right, with Hinoka, we have pretty much a dagger version of Fjorm. Okay, so Hinoka is a very similar stat spread to the NY Fjorm we picked up, if you bought the pack, of course. If you didn't pick up the pack or you didn't pick up NY Fjorm, she pretty much has a very similar stat spread, having like 35 attack and speed. But the difference is, of course, weapon availability. Plus, she comes with a really good out-of-kit like skills, like the Splashy Bucket being amazing. I covered that in yesterday's video as well. And honestly, like attack speed bond, attack speed link, these are all really good skills that she comes with. So I think she's a little bit better than NY Fjorm because of daggers really getting a lot of choices recently, especially all the effective weapons that daggers have. You can pretty much use anything from infantry slaying, from poison dagger, mage slaying, armor, cavalry. Like this really does. The only thing they're really missing is like flyer, which is what would make NY Fjorm better in comparison. However, there's just so many more things that kind of make daggers more flexible. We also, to be mentioned, is the fact that Camilla, the new one we get for free, comes with the Ouch Pouch, which is pretty much the same as the current weapon, which was discussed in yesterday's video. So you can reduce her special by 2 and use some pretty big nukes. So we're going to look at that in a moment. Coming up is exactly that. So Ouch Pouch combined with something like Iceberg and Quick Impulse, and of course Fury to give you a bit more res and attack this way, lets you start the fight with a really big nuke, especially if you consider something like maybe Fortified Flyers, which isn't hard to buffer with since it's readily available fodder. You can end up starting a fight with like 19, 20 damage, especially with like Ward Flyers or something, just straight up from Iceberg like that. And that's really useful. Something that would be really unique to her, especially since she already has a good attack stat. That's a nice gimmick. I think I would use this in maybe something like Arena Assault or maybe like a GHB if you really want to one-shot something. But it's not going to be too consistent in more prolonged fights. A more consistent type of build that I would recommend for Honoka would actually be something that uses Splashy Bucket and combine it with like Fury Desperation and Glimmer and of course a Heavy Blade Seal. The reason this is what I would consider more consistent is because you can take advantage of Glimmer and effective damage, plus of course Fury Desperation is definitely like the most consistent of skills you can combine. So this lets you kind of really take advantage of Splashy Bucket to slaughter all the dragons in the game. It's not too much of a setup either, especially if you maybe switch out like Drawback with Ardent Sacrifice. You wouldn't even need to get into combat, but like her HP is low enough that you can pretty much go into desperation range after hitting something twice or just taking one enemy phase hit on like a mage, for instance, because her bulk with res is good enough that you could enemy phase something that way. Buffs really make this stand out even more. So yeah, I think Honoka is just like a slightly better version of NY Fjorm. But NY Fjorm, of course, in the end, I want to say does have like Brave Bow as an option and like Guard Bow. But Guard Bow could be compared to Goody Boot, for instance. So Brave Bow is definitely the thing, and Fire Sweep Bow are the two unique things that make NY Fjorm different from Hinoka. And that pretty much summarizes why Honoka kind of wins, just because more build flexibility that way. Okay, moving on, we have Elise. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised with Elise, probably the biggest winner from all of these units that came out. Honoka's really good, but the thing that I really like about Elise here is she comes with a really good stat spread, and unlike someone like Lind, Summer Lind, who's pretty much your colorless dagger cavalry, I think her stat spread's even better because it's really min-max. Like 37 base, 33 attack, and the rest of her stats being low is kind of not so relevant. And the fact that she's a red dagger at first may look pretty bad, but if you compare to someone like Flora, for instance, Flora doesn't have speed, doesn't have mobility, and can't really take advantage of crazy buffs available through like other cavalry units. And that's why someone like Elise surprises me, because you can do something crazy like this and forget her bulk and really just nuke things using red hot ducks with an AoE special. Plus this is kind of difficult to set up if you think about it, because Blazing Wind would take a while, so you could consider using something like Heavy Blade. But when you do this, you can pretty much use Ardent Sacrifice just to dump her into Desperation range. But even if you don't, she could potentially kill a lot of things really easily. And yeah, the Blazing Wind gets a lot of value here because Red Hot Ducks add 7 true damage on AoE special, plus the hit that follows up on Blazing Wind. So you're pretty much giving yourself 14 extra damage like that. And of course, if you had Desperation also active, you're pretty much adding 21 true effective damage off of Blazing Wind. And the thing with AoE specials is they're not affected by Weapon Triangle. So unlike someone like Flora, you can pretty much nuke a blue unit, a high defense blue unit, for 21 true damage, combining Red Hot Ducks, Blazing Wind, and Desperation, which is ridiculous. And of course, since she has a decent attack stat, it's not terrible, but it's not bad either. When you have like a buff active on her, she's going to do decent damage out of Blazing Wind and actually break the Weapon Triangle. So that's the thing that really makes Elise stand out. Along with the added mobility she has, you pretty much use her in a way that's super glass cannon, and because of mobility, you can afford to use her in this way. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised with Elise, and I think she's a really good unit, which is, you know, I honestly didn't expect that. The stat spread is really good. Unfortunately, that's really all I'm going to say about Elise. I think she also has other build options, but I really do value something like this. You could honestly use her as well. It's like as an enemy phase unit with like Fury. She'd have 30 res, which wouldn't be bad. You can switch out her dagger as well to use something like Barb Shuriken. You can even do, you know, variants of that build as well, like Fury Desperation, like Luna, for instance, with Heavy Blade, and Barb Shuriken. Like, these are all pretty good things you can use, but I think this one does, you know, breaking the weapon triangle is always a good thing in the game. So let's move on. Next up is the best eye candy from the banner. It's unfortunate that if you don't click the magnifying glass or plus over there, you can't actually see the best candy. They literally censored it. You can't even see his abs. What kind of disappointment is that? But honestly, that's really all Ryoma is. He's unfortunately not too good of a unit. There's too much competition for him in the 3 and 4 star pool to really matter to invest in him. He just doesn't have much going for him. He's pretty much just a 1 speed more than Cordelia unit, and swaps like the defense and the res. And in fact, his higher HP doesn't really go like too well with him if you want to be using things like Wings of Mercy or Fury Desperation, for instance, or Escape Route. Like, these are all other builds as well. So I'm not too impressed with Ryoma's stat spread. It doesn't really do him any favors. He's just kind of like a 1 speed more Cordelia, but you might have like 10 Cordelia, so with merges, you know, Cordelia just does it better. Now, if you want to use him just as like one of a kind and you want to invest in him because maybe he's too hot to fodder away, and I'm sorry, I can't blame you if that's the reason you want to keep him, then you want to do something like this, especially for ether raids. Chill's speed does come on his kit, so it does him some favors. Pretty much go for a 2-charge Gale Force. It's pretty consistent this way. You have to fodder off Jomke to make this happen, but it is worth it. A 2-charge Gale Force means that if he ends up one-shotting some squishy units like Ophelia or Lilina, it doesn't matter, and that makes him really good. So yeah, this is the way I would definitely recommend using him. Especially combined with another unit that might be using like a Slaying Edge, for instance, with the Heavy Blade Seal. You can pretty much afford to have 2 consistent Gale Force units this way. But the thing is, just like I mentioned, you could just give this build to Cordelia and that's just straight up better, right? Yeah, there it is, right? So the thing is, you can merge up Cordelia. She already comes with Gale Force, so it's not even that much of an investment. You pretty much just give her the weapon, curtains, do the same thing, and she already has Gale Force when you upgrade her. So, you know, there really isn't much of a reason to use Ryoma. In fact, the lower defense on Cordelia might help if a unit counterattacks and brings her into Wings of Mercy range. Because there's not that many units that retaliate and do res damage. It's going to be like pretty much dragons. So you don't really see that as often as you see melee units that retaliate. So Cordelia has more things going for her, unfortunately, unlike Ryoma. And finally, just as another kind of comparison, of course, we have Katria. And, you know, if you have her on a flyer team, she's just objectively better than Ryoma in every single way, unfortunately. Like, she has similar stat spread in defense and res, and with White Wing Lance Special Refined, you have 3 stats. You just beat out Ryoma in, like, every single area. But if you don't use her that way, then yeah, she's going to be doing like a cooldown reduction build using her own preference weapon, which has more attack built into it than something like Curtains. So yeah, I mean, like, honestly, I'm just disappointed that Ryoma doesn't really do much to the unit unless, you know, he's eye candy. And that's pretty much all it is. It's just eye candy. You have your better options in Katria and in Cordelia. Even Claire can kind of do some of these things as well. So I don't really recommend using Ryoma other than just kind of like a bench spot-in type of unit. Okay, and finally, we have probably the most controversial unit to show up. That's going to be Camilla. All right. I'm sure somebody wants to know my opinion on the art. I'm not too impressed. I don't know. It's a different artist, so I guess that's why. I still like Camilla as a character, though. It's just this wasn't what I expected when it comes to art, but whatever. The thing that is more important to look at here, besides my opinion, is what does Camilla bring to the table as a unit? And the reality is she really doesn't bring much. We got air for free. So Cam isn't really much different. If you want to really like consider how to use Cam, the thing that she has going for her is pretty much that she's kind of a budget good unit to use out of the box without much investment. I mean, you can give her, she comes with Ouch Pouch, refine it for attack. She comes with Glimmer, give her an attack seal and DB throw, and you can go for some random one-shot gimmick. That's pretty much how I would recommend using Camilla, but it's not that useful. It's not that consistent. The attack isn't really that good without buffs or merges and such, so this is probably one of the better ways to use her because that's the effect of Ouch Pouch. The thing with Vantage is at least you could try to go for more damage on the enemy phase. I don't know. I don't really like. I don't see the real value in this because we have air. The thing that does make her different from air, though, is the fact that she has 3 more defense. So, because she has 3 more defense, she does this build slightly better than air, assuming you don't have a plus defense air who has a super boon, which brings her defense up to 18, which beats out Camilla anyways. So yeah, this is kind of what you could do with Camilla because of her extra defense, but it's still kind of weird. The thing that's really cool about this build is she has 40 base HP with a refine on Goody Boot, for instance. So one Ardent Sacrifice can put her right into double Brazen plus Vantage range. And that's okay. It gives you like 59 attack and a pretty high amount of defense. Like, I mean, you have 34 defense here without even considering Goody Boots' friends nearby for an extra up to 40 defense. So you really are stacking a lot of defense and a lot of attack this way. I think it could work pretty well, especially if you're baiting out a lot of range units. Of course, close counter in the A slot could also work, but you do lose a bit of attack and defense that way. And the bonfires do hurt. So this is kind of an interesting take on something she does a bit better than air. But at the end of the day, just use air. If you look at this build, you'll realize there's nothing to it because there isn't anything you have to change. Air is good as she is. She has a good preference weapon. She has good base kit. So, yeah. Just use air. Forehead. All right. So, we have a 4-person banner, which means we're going to take a look at the mathematics over here. To summarize the banner in what I consider you to look at it objectively, I think what you should be pulling for here, if you were to pull for anything, would be specifically for fodder. And that would be the most unique fodder, or the fodder that wouldn't get demoted for a while, or wouldn't show up at all. So the biggest candidates for the fodder on this banner have to be something like Grand Scratcher, Air Orders, and Curtains. I think those are really the kind of like the winners here. Elise's Red Hot Ducks is kind of interesting as well, but I think those are definitely really good. Shout out goes to Splashy Bucket as well for being really good, but I think those 3 that I mentioned have the most useful and most consistent amount of fodder that you'll get out of this banner if you were to target that specifically. As I showed earlier, Curtains I think is really useful if you play Ether Raids, and it would really decide it. But what I want to specifically talk about here is I feel like Curtains is the type of weapon that would eventually show up in the permanent pool. So think of something like Candlelight to Flash, or believe it was Giant Spoon to Woe Gun. I could definitely see that weapon showing up on a permanent weapon in the future. So I wouldn't go out of my way to pick it up here because I could see it definitely in the future. Beyond that, though, something like Air Orders, I don't see would show up at all for a really long time. And if it was to show up, it'd probably show up on a seal. And Grand Scratcher, again, is really good as a support thing. So that is definitely the things that you would consider going for. I don't recommend really pulling for anyone specifically out of this banner. There's no one here that stands out as kind of like a must-have unit or game-breaking meta in any way. Honestly, the strongest unit from this banner feels like Elise, and it's a cavalry unit. And it's a red cavalry dagger. So she has some weaknesses, and she's also kind of like a gimmick. It's not like a consistent unit you can use in every mode, because as I showed earlier, she's kind of not, like, because of the red dagger being there, you kind of have to put her into a specific team comp and set her up properly. So the units themselves don't really recommend pulling for. Do consider as well that the anniversary is coming up. The banner itself lasts 30 days, so if you haven't pulled already, then you should definitely wait out to see what the anniversary has to offer, because there could be better stuff. There's going to be more banners. There's going to be a mythic banner coming up as well. So, you know, don't really waste your orbs here. Just kind of wait out and see what happens. If you have maybe like 1 or 2 things that really will kind of decide your team comps, then it might be worth trying. But as you'll notice by the mathematics here, it may not be worth trying for it in general. Like, for instance, if you're going to go for Curtains, you could potentially spend up to 362 orbs, as you can see there on the 90th percentile. 1 in 10 people spend 362 orbs for a copy of Curtains. Like, that's not really, I don't think that's worth it, because that's almost as many orbs as we'll get in a month of free-to-play orbs. So that's not really too good. The 4-person banner here does mean that it takes a lot of orbs to get a specific focus unit, and that kind of sucks. If it was 3-person, then it would be a lot better, but because of that, high orb counts are needed to really get stuff out of this. That's pretty much my take on it. Your best odds are probably to pick up someone like Hinoka for Air Orders or Splashy Bucket. It still ends up taking an average about 142 orbs, which I still think is a pretty hefty cost, but at least it's not as bad as somebody like Red here for Elise, which could take up to 400 orbs, and that's more than our That's more than the amount of allowance we get in a month. So with all that being said, I hope you took something out of this video. Hope it helped you make a decision. If you were on the fence about it, definitely wait for the Mythic Banner or the anniversary. If you're on the fence, I do think that's a high thing to consider. Check out my Mythic Banner predictions. I had that uploaded a few days ago. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Give the video a thumbs up if you haven't already. Sub to the channel if you haven't. Thanks, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you plan to use, what you plan to do or use these units, or maybe save up for a legendary banner in the future to pick them up. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.